The alarm goes off, same as always. Before your eyes have fully adjusted to the light, your hand has already reached for your phone. You scroll for a few minutes, maybe 10, while part of your mind is still somewhere between sleep and the day ahead. Eventually, you get up. You brush your teeth in the same order you always do, make your coffee exactly the way you like it, and move through the morning almost effortlessly. You don't stop to think about each step because you don't have to. It feels completely normal. You leave the house, lock the door, and head toward work. Somehow, your feet already know where they're going. The drive feels familiar. The turns come at exactly the right moments. Sometimes your mind drifts somewhere else entirely, and yet you still arrive without remembering much of the journey. Later, it's the usual lunch, the usual seat, the same quick glance at your phone while waiting. You reply to messages in the same tone you've always used, laugh at the same kinds of jokes, and by evening, you're back home settling into routines that look remarkably similar to yesterday's. It's comfortable, efficient, predictable. Nothing about it seems unusual, but the truth is, most of what you've done throughout the day wasn't decided in the moment. It had already been decided long before today began. Not by someone else, but by you. Or rather, by the version of you who repeated those actions often enough that your brain quietly took over. You didn't notice. Why would you? There isn't a dramatic moment where life suddenly switches into automatic mode, because no warning appears and no voice asks whether you'd like to keep using the same routine. It just continues. One day becomes the next becomes a week becomes a year. And because each day looks only slightly different from the one before it, the changes are almost impossible to see while they're happening. We often imagine our lives are shaped by the big moments, the promotion, the breakup, the move to a different city, the opportunity we accepted, or the one we let pass. Those moments matter, but they aren't the whole story, because between those milestones lies thousands of tiny actions, tiny decisions, and tiny repetitions, most so ordinary that they never seem important enough to question, until one day you catch yourself asking something you weren't expecting. When did this become my life? Not because it's a bad life. Not because everything is falling apart. Sometimes from the outside, everything looks perfectly fine. The job is stable. The bills are paid. The routine works. So why does it sometimes feel as though you're moving through your own life instead of actually living it? The answer isn't as simple as boredom. And it isn't that you've suddenly become unmotivated. In many cases, your brain is doing exactly what it evolved to do. Think about learning to ride a bicycle. At first, every movement demanded your attention. You had to think about your balance, where to look, how hard to pedal, when to brake. It felt awkward because nothing happened automatically. Then something changed little by little. After enough repetition, your brain stopped treating those movements as new. It bundled them together into a pattern, allowing you to ride without consciously thinking through every adjustment. The same thing happens when you learn to type or drive or tie your shoes. Your brain is constantly searching for ways to save effort. Every task it can automate is one less task demanding your attention tomorrow. It's an extraordinary ability. Without it, even the simplest morning would leave you mentally exhausted before you'd stepped outside. So creating habits isn't the problem. It's one of the smartest things your brain does. The question is, what happens when that same process extends beyond brushing your teeth or driving to work? What happens when it begins shaping the way you think, the way you react, the choices you make, and even the person you believe yourself to be? Because habits have a quiet way of growing. They rarely stay confined to actions. Given enough time, they begin influencing expectations, then assumptions, eventually something even deeper. Identity. What does that actually look like? Imagine someone disagrees with you during a meeting. The words leave their mouth. And before you've really had time to think, something inside you has already responded. Maybe you become defensive. Maybe you stay quiet, even though you wanted to speak. Maybe you laugh it off. while replaying the conversation for the rest of the day. It all happens so quickly that it feels like a choice. But was it? Or was it simply the reaction your mind has rehearsed hundreds of times before? Then the next time someone disagrees with you, the same reaction arrives a little faster, then faster still. After a while, you stop expecting those conversations to go differently. You begin walking into them already assuming you'll be misunderstood, or that speaking up isn't worth the effort. And assumptions have a quiet way of shaping thoughts. Because instead of asking, "What do I really think about this?" your mind is already saying, "There's no point explaining." Instead of wondering whether you could handle the challenge, the thought arrives almost instantly. "I'll probably mess it up." Not because you've carefully examined the situation, but because your brain has repeated that conclusion so many times that it reaches for it automatically. Eventually, those thoughts stop feeling like choices. They stop sounding like opinions. They begin sounding like facts. "I'm just not good under pressure. I'm not someone people listen to. I've never been a confident person. I'm just an overthinker. This is simply who I am." Notice the shift. You no longer describe what you repeatedly do. You now describe who you believe you are. The habit started as a reaction. Then it became a thought. The thought became an assumption. The assumption became a belief. And eventually, it became part of your identity, what you tell yourself who you are. But think about it. Is the person you were when those patterns first formed really the same person you are today? Chances are no. Since then, you've lived through experiences that changed you. You've learned things, lost things, and even grown in ways you probably didn't notice while they were happening. Yet your autopilot never stopped to ask whether it should change too. It simply kept running the same familiar routes, offering yesterday's reactions, yesterday's assumptions, and yesterday's version of who you are. And that's where life can begin to feel strangely unfamiliar. Not because you've stopped growing, but because your autopilot hasn't grown with you. The person who first created those patterns may have needed them. The patterns may have protected you, helped you fit in, or simply helped you get through a difficult chapter. But that chapter ended. You didn't. You kept learning. You kept changing. Quietly. Almost without noticing. Yet every day, your autopilot keeps asking an older version of you how to respond, how to think, what to expect, and even who to be. Perhaps that's why certain parts of life start feeling out of place. Not because you're on the wrong path, but because you're still walking according to an old map. So how do you begin stepping out of autopilot? Not by changing your entire life overnight, because most of your routines aren't the problem. The problem is forgetting that there's still a choice. What you need are small moments of conscious awareness. For instance, the next time someone disagrees with you, notice what happens inside you. Notice the urge to become defensive. Notice the thought, "There's no point explaining." And notice how quickly your mind reaches for the conclusion, "I'll probably mess it up." The moment you notice it, pause. Not to judge yourself, but to simply ask one gentle question. Is this still the choice I would make today? Sometimes the answer will be yes, sometimes it will be no. But for the first time, you'll realize you have a choice. A choice to let today's version of you decide what happens next. And perhaps that's all it means to step out of autopilot, not becoming a different person overnight. Just remembering that between what happens to you and how you respond, there is still a choice. And perhaps that's where a more intentional life begins.